All right, let's jump right into this explainer by acknowledging a universal truth. For a lot of us, especially if you're over 65, that first cup of coffee in the morning, it is absolutely not just a beverage. It is a sacred ritual. You know, it's the warm light in the kitchen, the steam rising from your favorite mug, just that quiet moment before the whole day begins. And let me tell you right out of the gate, I am definitely not here to tell you to give it up. No way. But there is a real measurable relationship between caffeine and your bones that almost nobody explains clearly. So we're going to break down exactly what's going on inside your body. Because look, you've probably seen the scary headlines, right? The ones constantly popping up on your news feed claiming your morning brew is silently destroying your skeleton. And honestly, it's super easy to get anxious when you read that stuff. But today, we're actually going to look at the hard science to find out what's really happening. We're moving way past the scare stories and looking directly at the data. And honestly, some parts of this might totally surprise you. To understand the big picture here, we first have to zoom in on the microscopic one. Like, what is literally happening inside your body the exact moment that caffeine hits your system? We need to take a close look at the very real, but I should emphasize, very small biological mechanism at play. So caffeine essentially does two things to your calcium levels. First, it has a mild diuretic effect, which is really just a fancy way of saying it makes you urinate a little bit more. And well, some of what leaves your body in that extra urine happens to be calcium. Second, caffeine slightly reduces how efficiently your intestines actually absorb the calcium you're getting from your food. So when you put those two things together, your body ends up holding on to slightly less calcium on days with high caffeine intake. But here is the absolutely crucial point. This effect is just a slight nudge on your body's calcium scale. It is definitely not some catastrophic collapse. Well-controlled studies have carefully measured this, and they found that at moderate amounts of coffee, there is literally zero measurable effect on the total calcium you lose over a full day. Think of it like turning a dial just a tiny bit, rather than flipping a heavy switch. That dial really only starts to move your calcium balance at much, much higher intakes. So you might be wondering, if coffee isn't inherently dangerous and the biological effect is just a tiny little nudge, why on earth do we constantly hear these warnings specifically for folks over 65? It's a great question, because obviously coffee doesn't just suddenly turn toxic the morning of your 65th birthday. The real answer lies in what else is happening in your body as the years go by. Basically, your baseline bone-building capacity naturally lowers with age. For women, postmenopause means a decline in estrogen, and estrogen is a hormone that actively helps protect your bones. So that changes the bone rebuilding process for everyone, regardless of whether they even touch coffee. Plus, as both men and women get older, our bodies just naturally become less efficient at absorbing calcium and vitamin D from our diets. So your baseline is just a little lower to begin with. And that gives anything that nudges your calcium balance, like, say, really high caffeine intake, but also inactivity or a poor diet, just slightly more room to actually matter. Okay, let's actually look at the data now, because this is where those health headlines often get the story completely wrong. When we study massive groups of people over long periods of time, the research on coffee and bone density doesn't point in one clean, terrifying direction at all. Actually, it paints a very different and much more reassuring picture. Well, here's the fascinating part. At a cup or two a day, researchers find absolutely no meaningful impact on your bones. None. And even at 4 or more cups a day, which is a pretty solid amount of coffee, we do see a tiny 2 to 4% drop in density. But here is the critical takeaway. There is no actual increase in your risk of fractures. None at all. And consider this massive number, 400,000. One huge analysis covering roughly 400,000 people actually found that higher coffee intake was linked to somewhat lower rates of osteoporosis overall. Lower, not higher. I mean, that completely turns the common scare tactic narrative right on its head, right? It just shows how mixed the data genuinely is. So when you aggregate all of this data, the honest consensus among researchers is pretty simple. Caffeine is a minor dose-dependent factor. It is absolutely not a primary cause of bone loss. To use an analogy, if your overall bone health is a balancing scale, caffeine is just a tiny little pebble on that scale. It is for sure not the heavyweight tipping you over into the danger zone. But wait, what if you aren't drinking your coffee black? Because let's face it, a lot of us don't. We definitely need to look at how a simple splash of milk totally changes the chemistry of your morning routine. There are some health sources out there claiming that putting milk in your coffee doesn't meaningfully help. Well, actually, scratch that. That is just a complete myth. Adding milk adds real, absorbable calcium directly to your cup. In fact, a typical splash or a small glass of milk in your coffee often adds way more absorbable calcium than what a moderate cup of coffee causes you to lose. Now, it's not a magic eraser if you're downing 6 cups a day, but for the average drinker, it genuinely helps. So it turns out the real issue isn't the coffee itself, but rather a sneaky little habit that often goes with it: the empty breakfast. Remember how we said caffeine reduces calcium absorption in the gut? Well, it interacts with whatever calcium is actually available at that specific meal. If your coffee entirely replaces your breakfast, meaning absolutely no food, no calcium at all, you aren't giving your body any calcium to work with in the first place. You literally can't block the absorption of something that just isn't there. Let's shift our focus to the actual heavyweights on the scale, the things that genuinely move the needle for your bone density. Because if coffee is just a tiny pebble, what should we really be paying attention to as we cross that 65-year mark? Here is your actual real-world priority list. First up is your calcium and vitamin D intake, from things like dairy, leafy greens, or getting some safe sun exposure. Second, and this is incredibly important, is weight-bearing exercise. Walking, light strength training, balance work, these are vastly more powerful tools for maintaining your skeleton than meticulously tweaking your diet. You really only need to worry about the third item on this list, your caffeine dose, if you're literally drinking pots of it every day. Proper nutrition and exercise matter infinitely more. Oh, and a super quick pro tip for you: if you take a daily calcium supplement, maybe don't wash it down with your morning brew. Just take your supplement a couple of hours away from your coffee. This simple little timing trick gives your body a totally clean shot at absorbing that calcium, without any of caffeine's mild blocking effects getting in the way. Now, if you are someone who drinks 4 or more cups a day and you kind of want to dial it back without losing your mind, just try this. Keep your first cup fully caffeinated, ideally with some food and a nice splash of milk. Then simply swap your third or fourth cup for decaf. That way you keep the taste and the ritual. You can also try a decaf latte or a fortified plant milk to actually add some extra calcium back into your day. Nobody needs to quit cold turkey here. Let's bring this all together and review what we've unpacked in this explainer. The biological effect of coffee is tiny, and it really only starts to matter at 4 or more cups. Getting older simply lowers your baseline, which just makes other big lifestyle factors a lot more critical. The research is highly mixed. Milk absolutely helps offset any minor losses, and your real vital focus should always be on staying active and well-nourished. So, if this explainer gave you a much calmer, clearer picture than those scary internet headlines, let me know your daily cup count in the comments below. It really helps us know what topics to dive into next. And be sure to subscribe for more clear, evidence-based explainers that completely skip the scare tactics. Now, I leave you with this. Considering everything we just learned about the actual science of bone health, what small change are you going to make to your morning routine tomorrow? And more importantly, what other scary health headlines might just be a tiny pebble on the scale? Think about it, and seriously, enjoy your coffee.